Now, though, I want to start off with the matchup from last night of the Denver Nuggets, who were once again able to take down the Minnesota Timberwolves for the third consecutive game. And we already talked about this at length earlier in the week, the idea that everybody had just sort of moved on from the Nuggets and counted them out after going down 0-2 in Denver, and now seeing what the real championship mentality looks like. And of course it's headed by Nikola Jokic, who put together maybe his best NBA game of his career. He was absolutely tremendous. He scored 40 points. He shot it was 40 points, 15 of 22 from the field, 13 assists and 0 turnovers. I thought that he also was contributing on the defensive end as well. And it was just a total masterclass from him, where, yet again, this is just an example of the fact that there really isn't anybody, any team that can hold down Nikola Jokic, and just sort of shows the gap, at least in my opinion, between him and anybody else in the league, the way that he is this unstoppable, because of the fact that we saw last night the Timberwolves come into the game with the defensive mindset of they were going to play Jokic one-on-one and have him be guarded by Rudy Gobert, who just won his 4th Defensive Player of the Year award, one of 3 players to ever do so. It was him, Dikembe Mutombo, and Ben Wallace, and it just wasn't enough. We saw the physical force of Jokic, and during the broadcast last night, I believe it was Jamal Crawford and Reggie Miller sort of threw in some anecdotes as well, but all of the different types of players that is sort of baked into this, what Jokic looks like, what his final form is, and you really got it all. You got the post moves of Hakeem Olajuwon. You got the, dominant force sometimes, just going over other big men like Shaquille O'Neal, and it was just unbelievable for him. I thought that a really interesting possession for him as well, because obviously, the post moves, and again, Rudy Gobert, I feel like he's going to continue to get a lot of slack after this game. He's never exactly been NBA fandom's favorite player, but I think that he played good defense on a lot of these possessions, but just the footwork of Jokic to get to his spots, he's hitting these difficult shots, he's going with the hooks over Gobert. He had that lefty, he had drop step down the baseline and pulled away with this little lefty floater as well. This was early in the first quarter, or late in the first quarter, I should say, but again, just an unbelievable performance from Jokic. And again, that's the thing, is you take the one player that is probably best suited to guard Jokic, and, maybe Anthony Davis would like to have a conversation in this as well. I thought that he did pretty well for himself for the most part during the first round series, but it was clear. The Timberwolves and their assistant head coach, who spoke to the reporter after the first intermission, talked about the idea of want to take his playmaking out of it, play him one-on-one. We'll see how this continues to progress. And ultimately, Gobert just wasn't enough to stay in front of Jokic. And again, the fact that Gobert, who is this, you can call him a generational defender, at least the accolades would say that, and he was just getting moved physically by Jokic, could not stay with him, and, it just continues to show that Jokic is elevating himself to this all-time status that feels like top 20 at least already. But you look at some of the other active guys, him and Kevin Durant at this point, I kind of feel like the argument for KD, now we know how great of a scorer KD is and everything along those lines, but it is truly tremendous what he does. And again, his legacy just continues to build upon itself, and it seems like the Nuggets are now in the driver's seat in this series. And there is definitely a little bit of an interesting what if in this equation, because of the fact that Jamal Murray probably should have been suspended for game 3. Now, I honestly have no rooting interest in this series necessarily. I'm just looking at the basketball itself. If I were a Timberwolves fan, though, I would definitely be upset because of the fact that I think if the Nuggets aren't down 0-2, Murray is probably suspended for that game 3, but they didn't necessarily want to effectively end the series right there. Now, I'm not this huge conspiracy theory person that says, oh, well, the NBA couldn't allow Jokic to be upset in the second round. The NBA would probably prefer that Anthony Edwards becomes the face of the league, this American-born player, up and coming. He is super personable. So I don't think that, the rigged conversations are necessarily valid, but at the same time, Timberwolves fans definitely do have a very fair gripe in this, and again, we'll see how the last couple games play out here. I wouldn't rule Minnesota out. They were without Mike Conley in this game, who we talked about it throughout the regular season. I think that he actually does mean more to the team than the average NBA viewer realizes, because of the fact that it is, there isn't really necessarily a ton of scoring options. It's Anthony Edwards doing a lot of creation on his own, and we've seen some developments from Karl Anthony Towns, but, overall as a whole, I just think that Conley is the steadying force in the whole team here. Now, Nickeil Alexander-Walker actually did do a pretty good job replacing him in the starting lineup, so that was encouraging to see if you're Minnesota. But you think that Conley can hopefully return for Game 6. He was dealing with an Achilles injury that occurred right at the end of Game 4, so, again, I'm not ruling Minnesota out, but I talked about the fact that outside of Anthony Edwards, there really isn't much offensive creation. And we saw Edwards probably look like his actual age, where he's a 22-year-old player, and he's done a tremendous job of putting the team on his back to deliver these types of massive performances and help the Timberwolves shock a lot of people who maybe weren't watching them as much in the regular season. But last night, 18 points on 5 of 15 from the field, 1 of 5 from 3. You could see that the Nuggets were really trying to sell out on defense just for Anthony Edwards, and sort of the anti-Jokic, where we saw the Timberwolves try and say, okay, Jokic, you can do your individual thing. We're not going to take away the others. I don't know how much the others were really, necessarily effective in this game. And like I said, Nickeil Alexander-Walker actually had a pretty decent performance for himself. Karl Anthony Towns had a nice bounce-back game after he really struggled in Game 4. So it would have been nice, obviously, for the Timberwolves to be able to have Anthony Edwards sort of show up. But still, I don't even know if that was going to be enough, because one of the most impressive things, and like I just sort of described, I don't believe that Minnesota's offense is necessarily the most nuanced, but I thought that Denver's defense was great last night, and yet again, we saw in these instances without Jokic, them be able to hold their ground. Now, the scoring part of it was definitely an issue for them, which is what we've seen, but defensively, I thought that the beginning of the second quarter, with Jokic on the bench, we just saw some incredible defense from the Nuggets, where it was Justin Holiday coming in. He took a couple charges. You were getting some help from a few different people in terms of hustle plays. Aaron Gordon continues to be a massive factor in these types of games, so that was super encouraging. I will say I threw it in right at the very end of the conversation on Monday when we talked about this. Yet another underwhelming Michael Porter Jr. performance. Yet again, Christian Braun playing instead of him in those final minutes. Michael Porter Jr., and again, just sort of talking about as this series progresses, I am not ruling Minnesota dead by any means, and sort of something that could continue to play a factor is the fact that MPJ, he did not have really the aggression level that was needed in Game 4. Now, I say needed, but at the same time, Nuggets were still able to win that game, so it wasn't a big deal. But in this game, it seemed like MPJ was going out of his way to try and manufacture looks for himself, and the shot takes just weren't necessarily of great quality. He finishes this game 2 of 10. He was 2 of 7 from 3, and like I mentioned, for the second straight game, he is riding the bench as the Nuggets end up closing this one out. Now, I would say that this game was probably a little closer than the final score would indicate. The Timberwolves were keeping this alive. They went on a run at one point early in that fourth quarter to make things interesting, but ultimately it is the Nuggets taking this game, winning their third straight in the series, and putting themselves in a great position where I think that we are probably going to see Conley back for Minnesota, at least knock on wood, because I think, like I've talked about, the Timberwolves definitely need him, but they now have a little bit more wiggle room, and you saw Jokic after the game, after putting together this terrific performance. The TNT reporter had asked him about what kind of weight was lifted off of their shoulders winning this game and taking the series lead for the first time, and Jokic sort of shut that down and said that they're still playing desperate, they're not done yet, and I just feel like the accountability that Jokic holds, we praise Anthony Edwards as well, and for good reason, because he was taking the blame for himself after the Game 4 loss, I think is when he had the quote saying it was all my fault. But for Jokic to also sort of still instill that same level of belief and understanding what it takes to win is just something that makes the Nuggets still, I mean, I said all season I thought they were the best team in the NBA, and there was a little bit of, questions around that idea after they fell down 0-2, but now they're back and have an unbelievable chance here to sort of prove everybody wrong as they continue on in the postseason, and probably back to picking them if they were to, if I had to choose one team to win the finals, I'm probably still going with the Nuggets. But let me know in the comment section what your thoughts were on this Jokic performance, the series as a whole, and again, even that sort of legacy status. I don't like diving into the legacy thing all too much, but Jokic is kind of making it hard not to at this point with all of the accolades that he is racking up. But we are now going to be taking our first break of the show. When we come back on the other side, I want to talk about the other game from Tuesday night in the Knicks versus Pacers Game 5 matchup and the blowout that was. So stick with us and we will be right back.